At 9:27 a.m. on December 13, 1943, 2nd Lieutenant Philip Adair eased his Curtiss P-40N Warhawk into a climbing turn above Assam, India. As he came around, the morning haze suddenly parted. 64 Japanese aircraft were sliding through the sky just 3 miles to the east, heading straight for his home base at Dinjan Airfield. Adair was only 23, but he wasn't inexperienced. He'd already flown 43 combat missions with the 89th Fighter Squadron, guarding the vital hump airlift routes. Yet on this particular morning, he was the only American pilot already airborne. And the enemy formation was enormous. Over the past 2 months, Japanese strike groups had hammered Allied bases across northeast India, wiping out 47 transport planes on the ground and killing 112 personnel. Today's attack could be even worse. His Warhawk, number 44, nicknamed Lulu Bell, carried 6 .50 caliber Browning machine guns with just enough ammunition for about 12 seconds of continuous fire. Down below, the incoming force looked intimidating. 24 Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally bombers, shielded by roughly 40 agile Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters flying in stacked layers around them. Intelligence reports from Burma warned that formations of this size routinely achieved catastrophic accuracy against undefended airfields. And Dinjan was full of valuable targets. 14 fully loaded C-47 transports destined for China, a field hospital treating 63 wounded troops, and fuel reserves critical for almost 2 weeks of hump operations. If those bombers reached the runway untouched, Allied logistics over the Himalayas would be crippled. The closest friendly fighters were 38 minutes away at Jorhat. Adair checked his fuel, topped off at 180 gallons, giving him around 90 minutes of fight time. The Japanese force was cruising 3,000 feet lower at roughly 240 miles per hour. Doctrine said that if you were outnumbered by more than 5 to 1, you held back and waited for reinforcements. Adair wasn't facing 5 to 1. He was staring at 64 to 1. He could play it safe, radio for backup, and shadow the attackers until help arrived. But by then the bombs would already be dropping. The alternative? Charge in alone and try to wreck their bombing run before it began. Adair shoved the throttle forward. The Allison V-1710 roared instantly, manifold pressure shooting to 54 inches. The P-40 surged to 320 miles per hour. He climbed to a position about 4,000 feet above the bombers, approaching from the south with the sun behind him, his one real advantage. The Oscars still hadn't noticed him. Their attention was locked ahead, watching for defenders near the target. They weren't expecting a lone P-40 to hit them 20 miles out. Adair laid out his plan. Strike the lead bomber element first. Forget about the fighters for the opening pass. Break their formation, throw off their accuracy, force confusion. Anything to keep them from lining up a clean bombing run. Could one fighter really derail a 64-plane strike force? Stick around, let's see how it unfolds. And if you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Now, back to Adair. The leading group of Sally bombers flew tight, 6 aircraft in 2 neat V-shaped elements. Adair rolled the P-40 upside down, pushed the nose down, and dropped toward them from their high 7 o'clock position. His airspeed climbed fast, 360 mph. Then more. The Warhawk's engine screamed at full power. The range closed rapidly. The bombers still had no idea he was there. At about 800 yards, he squeezed the trigger. All 6.50 calories thundered, sending streams of tracers into the formation. The round stitched across the lead bomber's left wing. Fabric shredded. Sparks sprayed from the metal. A moment later, the port engine burst into flames, coughing out thick black smoke. Instantly, the bomber formation unraveled. Aircraft broke left and right, their clean V collapsing into scattered shapes. Adair hauled back hard on the stick. 7GS slammed him into the seat. He rolled right, just as 40 Oscar fighters dove straight at him. The Ki-43 Oscar was notorious for its maneuverability. With a 1,150 horsepower Nakajima engine, it could hit 329 miles per hour at altitude and turn tighter than any American fighter in the region. Its butterfly flaps let it snap into sharp, low-speed turns without stalling, and Japanese pilots used that trait mercilessly. In just 6 months, Oscars had taken down 63 Allied fighters across Burma and northeast India. Adair's P-40N was quicker in a straight dash. Its Allison engine could push it to 378 miles per hour below 12,000 feet, but in a turning dogfight, the heavier Warhawk bled speed far faster than the nimble Japanese fighters. P-40 pilots had a simple rule when facing Oscars: never turn with them. Use speed, hit hard, get away, and come back for another pass. But Adair couldn't run. If he broke off, the bombers would regroup and hit Dinjan. His only chance was to keep the pressure on, keep them scattered, keep them guessing, even if it meant facing 40 fighters by himself. The first 4 Oscars swept in from his 10 o'clock high in a loose finger 4. Adair rolled left, lifted the nose, and let off a 2-second burst at the lead fighter. The tracers passed high. The Oscar snapped right, its wingman following. Adair reversed his turn, diving to maintain energy. Immediately, 2 more Oscars pitched down toward him. He caught them at 400 yards, pulled into a climbing left turn, fired again, and still no hits. Adair glanced at his ammo indicator, only about 800 rounds left across all 6 guns. At the rate he was firing, that meant maybe half a dozen more attack runs before he was dry. Behind the fighter screen, the Sally bombers were trying to pull themselves back together. 3 groups of 6 were tightening up again. If they managed to rebuild their clean V-shaped formations, they'd go right back to their bombing run. He figured he had maybe a minute and a half before they reached the release point over Dinjan. Adair lined up, pushed the throttle all the way forward, and dropped toward the bombers again. 8 Oscars dove after him. The P-40 picked up speed quickly, 405 miles per hour in the dive. The Oscars simply couldn't keep up. Their gap widened as he leveled out at the bomber's altitude and set his sights on the right-hand Sally formation. At roughly 300 yards, he fired. The tracers stitched directly into the lead bomber's starboard engine. The Mitsubishi radial blew apart in a bright fireball. The bomber rolled violently right, trailing pieces and flames. Its wingman jerked out of formation to avoid smashing into it. Adair tapped rudder, slid left, and shot at another Sally. His rounds punched clean through the bomber's thin fuselage. The Ki-21 had no real protection, no armor, no self-sealing tanks. It was a 1936 design, outclassed by 43 standards, but each one still carried more than a ton of bombs, enough to flatten everything sitting on Dinjan's runway. But now the Oscars were back on him, a dozen this time, closing fast. Adair checked his gauges. Fuel, 162 gallons. Ammo, 650 rounds left. The bombers were only 19 miles from the target. Maybe 4 minutes before they hit drop range. Then a new problem appeared. His engine temperature started creeping up. The Allison V1710 was liquid-cooled, coolant flowed around the cylinders, through the radiator under the fuselage, bleeding off heat. But at anything above 50 inches of manifold pressure, the engine produced massive temperatures. The cooling system could only sustain that for about 20 minutes. Adair had been running at full combat power for 11. His coolant temp read 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal was around 210. At 250, the engine would start breaking down. He had 3 options: pull back power and let it cool, break off and return home, or keep fighting and gamble on the engine surviving long enough to save the airfield. The Sallies were now 17 miles out, still well within bombing distance. Adair kept his hand on the throttle and didn't pull it back. 2 Oscars rushed him head-on. Their combined closing speed topped 600 miles an hour. They opened fire at about 500 yards. Adair saw the bright flickers of their 7mm guns, the tracers drifting toward his nose. He fired back. His 50 calories rounds carried far more punch and traveled farther. At about 350 yards, his shot slammed into the left Oscar's engine cowling. The fighter shuddered, veered off, and streamed a white trail of coolant. The wingman followed him out of the attack. Adair rolled right and dropped into another dive. His coolant temp hit 240 degrees Fahrenheit. The bombers were now 15 miles from Dinjan. 2 of their formations had successfully rebuilt into bombing Vs. The third was a mess, 3 aircraft struggling to rejoin. Adair went for the lead group again. 6 Oscars tried to cut him off, but he dropped past them at nearly 390 miles per hour, too fast for them to turn with him. He leveled at the bomber's height and opened fire on the lead Sally. His first burst tore into the inner portion of the right wing. The structural frame snapped. The outer wing folded upward and ripped away completely. The bomber flipped upside down and spun out of control. No parachutes appeared. The crew never made it out. Once again, the formation shattered. Bombers scattered in multiple directions, their precision ruined. Even if they dropped their bombs now, the payloads would fall randomly across miles of jungle rather than concentrating on the airfield. Adair pulled up sharply. His coolant gauge now showed 248 degrees Fahrenheit. The engine started running rough, vibrations shaking through the control stick. He could feel the early signs of detonation, pre-ignition caused by the extreme heat. If he didn't ease off soon, the engine would seize completely. Then he spotted them, 8 Oscars dropping in from above. He caught their movement too late. He rolled left, but not fast enough. Their 7.7mm rounds tore into his right wing. Fabric ripped, metal bent. One shot clipped the right aileron's control linkage. The aileron went mushy, forcing him to push harder on the stick just to stay level. Another burst raked up the fuselage. Sparks jumped off the engine cowling. One round punched straight into the coolant tank behind the firewall. A spray of green coolant splashed across his windscreen. The temperature needle pushed past 260 degrees, and steam blasted out through the seams of the engine cowling. Oil pressure was collapsing. The Allison was on its last breath. Adair yanked the throttle back. RPM dropped from around 3,000 to 2,400, far too little to hold altitude. The P-40 began sinking. First 1,000 feet per minute, then 1,500. Above him, the Oscars circled like vultures, waiting for the kill. That's when his engine finally caught fire. Fires in liquid-cooled engines follow a grim pattern. The boiling coolant turns to vapor, then ignites. Flames race along the cowling, pushed by airflow. And if the fire reaches the fuel lines on the engine's left side, the whole aircraft goes up. Adair figured he had maybe half a minute before that chain reaction ended everything. By the book, the right move was to shut the engine down and bail out immediately. But he was only at 8,000 feet, falling fast, and still 12 miles from friendly territory, miles of jungle crawling with Japanese patrols. Jumping here would be a death sentence. So he kept the engine alive. The Allison's mixture could be manually leaned. Adair pulled the control back to idle cutoff for 3 seconds, starving the flames. The fire eased. He pushed the mixture forward again. The engine sputtered, coughed, then grudgingly stayed running, barely. Power was down to maybe 60%. Not enough to climb. Just enough to hold level flight for now. He had to choose, limp home on a burning, shot-up engine, or abandon the plane over enemy territory. Behind him, the Sally bombers were now 13 miles from Dingen. Close enough to turn around for another run, if their formation hadn't collapsed. Instead, the scattered bombers were drifting southeast toward Burma. The strike was over. The airfield was safe. Adair turned southwest toward Nagili, 43 miles away. Roughly 15 minutes of flying, if the engine survived that long. 6 Oscars came after him. At 7,000 feet, his oil pressure finally hit zero. The Allison relied entirely on that pressure to keep its crankshaft, camshaft, and connecting rods from metal-on-metal grinding. Without it, every moving part scraped itself apart. Heat rose. Metal swelled. And then engines seize. He felt the vibration grow nastier. The propeller no longer spun smoothly, it lurched. Power sank again. Airspeed bled down to 180 miles per hour. With a stall speed of 120, his safety margin was evaporating. The Oscars closed to within 400 yards, but didn't shoot. They were patient. They expected the engine to die on its own, or for him to bail out. One Oscar eased in beside him, close enough for Adair to see the pilot's face. The Japanese pilot pointed down. Surrender. Land. Become their prisoner. Adair didn't even look at him. At 6,000 feet, smoke filled the cockpit, not engine fire this time, but burning electrical wiring under the instrument panel. Rounds that had torn through his fuselage earlier had also sliced cables and wrecked the electrics. The smoke burned his eyes and throat. He shoved the canopy open. The blast of air pushed the smoke out, but also made breathing a fight. Airspeed fell to 160. The Oscars backed off. They didn't need to waste ammo. The P-40 looked doomed. At 4,000 feet, the right aileron cable finally snapped. The aileron kicked to full deflection. The plane rolled hard right, nose dropping into a dive. Adair pulled back with both hands. Nothing. The elevator cables were damaged too. He had no pitch control. The nose stayed down. His speed jumped, 200 miles per hour. 220. 250. The jungle rushed upward. Altitude 3,000 feet. 2,500. 2,000. A crash was seconds away. And then, an idea hit him. The P-40's ruined aileron was forcing the right wing down. The crippled elevator was stuck in a nose-down position. The whole airframe was being dragged into an uncontrolled dive. But aerodynamics work in both directions. If Adair rolled the aircraft upside down, everything would flip. The damaged aileron would now force the right wing up instead of down. The stuck elevator, fixed in a nose-down trim, would now act like a nose-up input. Flying inverted might turn the very damage that was killing him into the only thing that could keep him alive. At about 1,800 feet above the treetops, Adair rolled the P-40 completely upside down. Negative G slammed him into his harness. Blood surged toward his head until his vision reddened at the edges. The fuel system, built to work under positive G, struggled to feed the engine while inverted. The Allison sputtered, coughed hard, almost quit, then caught again, running rough but still producing just enough power. And just like he hoped, the nose began to rise. The dive slowed. By 1,200 feet, the P-40 was flying straight and level, upside down, at roughly 140 miles per hour. Adair held that inverted flight for 40 long seconds. His airspeed crept up to 160. He was actually climbing, maybe 50 feet per minute, but it was a climb. Then the fuel issue struck again. The engine started choking from starvation. He rolled upright. Instantly, the damaged controls shoved the nose down. The P-40 sagged, 600 feet per minute. Adair waited until he dropped about 300 feet, then flipped the aircraft upside down again. The nose rose. He clawed back 200 feet before the engine started cutting out and he had to roll upright. It became a rhythm, upside down to climb. Right side up to feed fuel. Flip, climb. Flip, descend. Over and over. Above him, the 6 Oscars watched this unbelievable fight for survival. An American P-40 with a burning engine and crippled controls, refusing to die, climbing by flying upside down, like a wounded animal still baring its teeth. One Oscar finally dove for a closer look. Adair saw him and immediately rolled inverted to gain altitude, then snapped upright straight toward the Japanese fighter. The Oscar peeled away. The American pilot was either insane or so desperate he couldn't be predicted. Either way, the Japanese backed off. The formation banked east and headed for Burma. Adair kept working his rolling climb toward Nagili. Fuel, 83 gallons. Oil pressure, 0. It had been pinned at 0 for 9 minutes. By all logic, the Allison should have locked solid. The connecting rods should have fused to the crankshaft. Yet the engine kept turning, running on sheer inertia, friction, and whatever microscopic oil film still clung to the internals. His altitude passed 3,000 feet. Then 4,000. Nagili was now 21 miles southwest, about 11 minutes if the engine held together. The coolant gauge no longer registered. The needle had melted off sometime earlier. Smoke still streamed from the cowling, but the fire itself had died away, either because it burned all the fuel available or because the lack of coolant had choked it out. At 5,000 feet, Adair finally spotted Nagili airfield, runway, tower, revetments, safety. But the relief was short-lived. A new problem appeared. The landing gear was hydraulic. The hydraulics depended entirely on engine-driven pressure. With the engine barely alive, pressure was almost non-existent. If he tried lowering the gear now and the engine quit, he'd crash short of the runway with the gear half down. If he kept the gear up and belly landed, the impact might rupture fuel tanks and turn the P-40 into a fireball. He needed the gear down and locked before the engine died. He reached for the gear lever. His right hand trembled, not out of fear, but from carbon monoxide poisoning. Smoke had been filling the cockpit for nearly 15 minutes. He pulled the lever. Nothing. The hydraulics sat at almost zero pressure. The gear stayed buried. The P-40 had a backup, a manual hand pump on the left side of the cockpit. 28 strokes would generate enough pressure for the gear to drop. Adair grabbed the pump with his left hand while keeping his right on the stick. He pumped. 1, 2, 3. No movement. The gear wouldn't budge. The pump needed both hands to work properly. But letting go of the stick meant losing control completely. His damaged ailerons and elevator would shove the nose down the instant he released it. So he improvised. He loosened his lap belt, wrapped it around the control stick, fed it through the seat frame, and cinched it tight. The makeshift harness held the stick roughly centered. Not perfect, but enough to fly straight for a few moments. He grabbed the hand pump with both hands and drove it hard. 5 strokes. 10. 15. At 23 strokes, he finally felt resistance. Pressure. At 28, clunk, the left main gear locked down. 3 seconds later, the right followed. The P-40 instantly became draggy. With the gear down, airspeed fell from about 160 to 135 miles per hour. Adair was still above stall speed, but just barely. The engine was barely giving him 40% power now, enough to keep him in the air, but not much more. Nageley Airfield was 7 miles ahead. 3 minutes, maybe less. His vision was narrowing. Gray shadows crept in from the edges. Carbon monoxide was clouding his brain, making it hard to think. He shook his head, forcing focus onto the runway. 6 miles out. The engine temperature gauge, the only one still working, read 310 degrees, well past the red line. Metal inside the engine was swelling with heat. Every second could be the last before a piston seized, a valve stuck, or a rod snapped. 5 miles. The tower operators at Nageley could see him now, a P-40 with smoke streaming from the cowling, flying erratically, landing gear down. From their perspective, he looked like he was going to make a standard approach. Lower flaps, slow down, touch down on the main wheels. Standard landing. But there was a problem. His flaps were hydraulic, too. And with the engine struggling, there wasn't enough pressure to operate both gear and flaps. Gear was down, flaps stayed up. Without flaps, his landing speed would be higher, 120 miles per hour instead of 90, and the 4,000-foot runway left little margin for error. 2 miles out, and the engine quit. The propeller windmilled, and the P-40 turned into a glider, a very poor glider. Normally, from 2,000 feet, he could glide about 3 miles, enough to reach the runway. But his aircraft was battered, with holes in wings and fuselage, throwing airflow off. Realistically, he would fall short, crashing into the jungle before reaching safety. After surviving 64 enemy aircraft, flying inverted for over 10 minutes, nursing a dying engine for more than a quarter hour, it looked like he would fail at the final stretch. Then he remembered something from training, something his instructor had mentioned about glide performance in the P-40. Flying inverted could actually extend range. Normally, gravity pulls the plane down while the wings generate lift upward. Upside down, the aerodynamics flip. The wing camber, designed to lift the aircraft, now pushes slightly downward, but at certain angles of attack, it can reduce drag and let the plane glide farther. The idea was theoretical. No instructor expected anyone to actually do it in combat. But Adair had nothing to lose. 1 mile from the runway, at 1,800 feet, he rolled the P-40 completely upside down. -1 G pressed him hard into his shoulder harness. Blood rushed to his head. Vision tinged red at the edges. The fuel system, designed for +G, struggled to feed the engine inverted. The Allison coughed, sputtered, almost died, then roared back to life, running rough but producing power. The nose lifted. The descent slowed. At 1,200 feet, he leveled out, flying inverted at 140 miles per hour. He stayed upside down for 40 seconds. Airspeed climbed to 160. He was gaining altitude, slowly, about 50 feet per minute. Then the engine began cutting out again. He flipped back upright. The damaged controls immediately pushed the nose down, and the P-40 sank at 600 feet per minute. He waited until he lost 300 feet, then rolled inverted again. Nose came up. Climbed 200 feet. Then upright again. Flip, climb. Flip, descend. He was alternating, using the damaged aircraft against itself, using physics and sheer ingenuity to keep climbing. The 6 enemy fighters circling above watched in disbelief. An American P-40, flames trailing, control shot, alternately inverted and upright, refusing to die, fighting like a wounded animal. One Oscar tried to intercept, but Adair rolled inverted to gain altitude, then rolled upright directly toward it. The Japanese pilot broke off. Insane? Desperate? Maybe both. But none dared engage further. They turned east, back toward Burma. Adair pressed on, rolling and climbing toward Nagili. Fuel gauge, 83 gallons. Oil pressure, 0, pegged there for 9 minutes. The engine should have failed completely by now. Connecting rods should have seized, the crankshaft locked. Yet somehow, it still ran, sustained by momentum, friction, and the tiniest remaining oil film. 3,000 feet, then 4,000. Nagili lay 21 miles southwest, roughly 11 minutes away if the engine held. The coolant gauge had long since failed, the needle melted off. Smoke still trailed from the cowling, but the flames had died. Either it burned out all remaining fuel or the lack of coolant had starved the fire. At 5,000 feet, he could see Nagili airfield, runway, control tower, revetments. Safety, but a new problem loomed. Landing gear was hydraulic, powered by the engine. Minimal power meant the pump might not extend the gear. Lower it too soon, and the engine could die before touchdown. Keep it up, and a belly landing could rupture fuel tanks and ignite the aircraft. He needed gear down and locked before the engine quit. Hands shaking, not from fear, but carbon monoxide exposure, he reached for the lever. Nothing. The hydraulic system, pressurized by the engine-driven pump, wasn't generating enough pressure. Gear stayed up. The P-40 had a backup, a manual hand pump. 28 strokes were needed. One hand on the stick, the other on the pump. No good. Let go of the stick and he'd lose control. Ingenious, he looped his lap belt around the stick, anchored it to the seat, holding the controls in approximate neutral. Not perfect, but enough to fly straight. Both hands on the pump, he went to work. Stroke 1. Nothing. Stroke 5. 10. 15. 23. Resistance. Pressure building. Stroke 28. The left gear dropped and locked. Seconds later, the right followed. Drag shot up. Airspeed dropped from 160 to 135 miles per hour, still above stall, barely. The P-40 was in bad shape. Smoke poured from the engine cowling. From a distance, it was impossible to tell friend from foe. Martinez had 3 seconds to decide, shoot or hold fire. He chose to hold. Adair crossed the runway threshold at just 90 feet, descending fast, too steep and too quick. In 4 seconds, the last 90 feet disappeared. The main wheels slammed into the concrete, 7GS compressing the struts fully. The tail wheel slammed down. Metal screamed. The right main gear collapsed. The wing dipped sharply. The tip scraped the runway, digging in. The aircraft ground looped to the right, spinning 180 degrees, throwing sparks and concrete chips everywhere. It skidded backward nearly 200 feet before finally stopping. Smoke poured from the engine compartment, and fire crews rushed to the plane. Adair sat frozen in the cockpit for 12 seconds, then loosened his shoulder harness, pushed himself up, and climbed onto the wing. His legs buckled under him, but he grabbed the wing strut for support. Ground crew reached him and helped him safely to the tarmac. Martinez arrived moments later with the fire team. They opened the cowling and found the Allison engine utterly destroyed, pistons seized, crankshaft warped, oil pan ruptured, coolant everywhere. Walking around the aircraft with Martinez, Adair took stock. 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, 7 in the right wing, 4 in the left. One round had cut the right aileron cable completely, another punctured the hydraulic reservoir, and a third had severed 2 electrical bundles behind the instrument panel. The engine had suffered catastrophic damage from overheating and oil starvation, every cylinder scored, 3 connecting rods welded to the crankshaft. The coolant system was wrecked. Lulu Bell would never fly again. But the mission had succeeded. Philip Adair had saved Dingen airfield. Intelligence later confirmed all 24 Sally bombers had turned back without releasing a single bomb. Their formations had scattered 15 miles from the target. The 40 escorting Oscar fighters had escorted empty bombers back to Burma. Allied facilities suffered zero damage. No casualties. 14 C-47 transports remained fully operational, and the hump airlift continued without interruption. 3 days later, on December 16, 1943, 10th Air Force Headquarters interviewed Adair. He described the entire engagement, his attack sequence, the inverted flying technique, and the landing approach. Flight surgeons examined him. His blood still showed dangerously elevated carbon monoxide levels 72 hours after the mission. By all rights, he should have been unconscious during the final 11 minutes of the flight. Yet he had remained functional, purely through willpower. On January 8, 1944, Lieutenant General Joseph Stilwell, commander of U.S. forces in the China-Burma-India theater, awarded 2nd Lieutenant Philip Adair the Silver Star. The citation read, "For gallantry in action against enemy forces on December 13, 1943, when Lieutenant Adair, flying alone, engaged and disrupted a formation of 64 enemy aircraft attacking Allied installations. Despite severe aircraft damage and personal danger, he continued his attack, preventing the destruction of critical supply facilities." Adair flew 95 more combat missions with the 80th Fighter Group, earned A status with 5 confirmed kills, and on his final mission in July 1944, shot down 2 Ki-43 Oscars over northern Burma. He returned to the United States in September 1944 and remained in the Air Force for 30 years, retiring as a full colonel in 1971. The 80th Fighter Group, the Burma Banshees, continued operations until August 1945, destroying 413 Japanese aircraft in air combat and 147 on the ground, while losing 63 pilots killed or missing. Their death's head skull insignia became one of the most recognized symbols in the CBI theater. The P-40 Warhawk never matched the fame of the P-51 Mustang or P-47 Thunderbolt. Slower, limited above 15,000 feet, and considered obsolete by 1943. Yet in the hands of a pilot like Philip Adair, its rugged frame proved what truly mattered in combat: courage, skill, and determination. One pilot. One P-40. 64 enemy aircraft. December 13, 1943. Adair demonstrated that impossible odds mean nothing when someone refuses to quit. His solution, flying alternately inverted and upright for 11 minutes, then landing inverted with gear extended, was unprecedented and never repeated. That's the story of the Burma Banshees, and the day one P-40 pilot disrupted an entire Japanese raid. If stories like this remind you why we preserve history, hit that like button, subscribe for more forgotten heroes, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and did anyone in your family serve in the CBI theater? Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.